My name's Jeff Younger. Starting at 2 years old, my ex-wife began to try to transition my son to a girl. When I refused to allow her to do that, she filed for divorce. We went through a long 10-year battle in the state of Texas. So I believe in leadership by example. So if I want my boys to be physically fit, I got to be physically fit.
Yeah, that's right.
So I've been a lifelong boxer. I brought my boys to the boxing gym with me, and they got introduced to masculine culture there. And my son Jude has a little bit of cerebral palsy, so he had a lot of trouble jumping rope. And so it took him 2 months just to be able to jump twice over the rope, but he never gave up.
Yeah.
So the day he jumped twice during the warm-ups, the entire boxing gym shut down. Pro boxers came over to him and said, "Hey man, we've been watching you for 2 months and we thought you were going to give up. But now you've jumped twice, that's officially jumping rope. So now we know you're one of us. You're not a quitter. Welcome to the boxing gym." And my sons realized that you don't have to be the best at something, but if you're not a quitter and you put in the work, men will give you respect.
Wow. That is such a great lesson.
Yeah, great lesson for my boys. And then they had never really seen two men get into a ring and try to put the hurt on one another. So I arranged for what I thought was going to be an exhibition match with a semi-pro boxer who outweighed me by almost 80 pounds, by the way.
Oh, my goodness.
We get in the ring, and the guy just clobbers me in the first round. I mean, he just destroys me. Finally gets a liver shot right at the end of the first round and drops me to the camera. I thought, God, we're only going 3 rounds, and my sons are going to see me get TKO'd in the first match. You know? So I don't know if you've ever been hit in the liver, but it doesn't. You don't really get knocked down. You just curl up in the fetal position because of a reflex action, and you can't get out of the fetal position, so you can't stand up. You know.
Wow.
So I'm laying on the ground trying to stand up, you know, and my son James walks over and says, "Dad, it's going to hurt just as bad standing up as it does on the ground. You might as well get up."
Wow. And
everybody laughed, and the referee laughed, my opponent laughed, and it made me laugh, which allowed me to stand up. I got the longest 10 count in history, then the longest 8 count in history, and then I think the guy let me finish the round, you know.
That's good.
And then I went okay. I got okay. If I could keep him away from me, I kept him away from me for the next 2 rounds, but he definitely beat my ass.
Wow.
So, but I realized at that point that my sons had my values.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like, you can take as much punishment as you want, but you're going to take the punishment whether you're on your knees begging for scraps or you're standing up making things happen. Either way, you're going to feel the same pain. So you might as well do the right thing.
Wow.
And I realized they had my values. And that actually is why I think she will not, in the end, win. I don't think she can take those values from my sons.
Well, Jeff, I think you've explained to us, you know, why you're doing this and why it's important to you. At the risk of not seeing your sons, I think that's, you know, as you said, there's stuff out there on the internet that will never go away. They'll be able to look back and see. I want to talk more specifically about James right now in this transition phase. What did you ever see any kind of hint that maybe your wife was correct, that maybe he is leaning that way? Now, I know as believers, we believe, my favorite passage of Scripture is Psalm 139 and how God made us and knit us together in the mother's womb, and he has a plan for us. Mm-hmm. So we definitely don't believe that God created us as one sex, but meant for us to be another. Mm. But what did you see early on in Jeff, and how did that present between you and your wife?
Well, here's the thing that your audience needs to know is my son never presented as a girl with anyone except his mother. I mean, think about this for a second. You got a boy who, with his father in church and everywhere else, is just wearing boys' clothes, playing with boys, going to the boxing gym, wrestling, whatever.
Yeah.
But with his mom, he wears girls' clothes. The courts consistently privileged this abnormal gender expression with his mother and eventually condemned him to a life of despair with chemical castration when he could have lived a normal life with me. So that tells you about the power of this ideology, right? My son did not present consistently. He did not meet by any means did he ever meet the clinical definition of gender dysphoria because he did not present consistency. He was perfectly comfortable as a boy. Perfectly comfortable. And told counselors that. What initiated them taking my kids away from me in Texas was my son made an outcry to the court-appointed counselor. Her name is Dr. Susan Fletcher. She practices out of Frisco, Texas. My son told her that he wanted to be a boy and he was embarrassed wearing girls' clothes. She initiated a CPS investigation against me for that. Threw me out of the office, threw my son out of the office. I had to go through, $60,000 in litigation after that. And they took my sons away from me because what they realized was that my son was rejecting a female identity, and let me just tell you the approach I took with my son. And anybody who's going through this is the approach I recommend. I did not have talks with my son about any of this. I never talked about it. All I did was I just showed my son how awesome it is to be a man.
Yeah.
When you're a man, you can just take a sleeping bag and a tent and you can just go camping somewhere. You can just walk off without anything and just live.
Yeah.
You can just go make stuff. My sons wanted bedroom furniture, new bedroom furniture, so we made it. And they said, well, we don't know how to make it. I said, well, we'll just figure it out because we're men. We just figure things out and make them happen. And I just showed them how awesome it was to be men. And my son just naturally took to that and rejected a female identity. And when when the court and the psychologist realized that my son was rejecting a female identity, that's when they took my sons away from me so that they could only have my son around his mother, who was telling him that he was a girl. In fact, if you go out to YouTube, you can find a video. It's just search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl." That's the first iPhone video I ever took. And it's my son saying that his mom is teaching him that he's a girl, and he's starting to believe it.
Yeah, I saw that video.
Yeah.
I think it's no surprise to any of us, especially if we're parents, that we can persuade our kids so easily. And there's science behind this that says that their brain is not formed until they're, well beyond their teens, into their 20s. And I think that's why it's so important for us to realize that this is really child abuse, is what this comes down to.
Abuse. Yeah.
Because you're inflicting this set of whatever on your children when they don't know what they want or what they, because they trust you.
Right.
They inherently trust you. And when you've got one parent saying this is okay and another parent saying no, this conflicts against all that is true, where do they go? I mean, I really feel for your son, because I don't know how life is tough enough as a kid.
Yes.
When you're trying to learn. But to have two parents telling you two different things, I think it's child abuse. It really is. It is
100% child abuse. Look, as Christians, we know the Bible's very clear, right? You learn how to be a man from your father.
Yeah.
And you learn how to be a woman from your mother. You have to learn God's law. It's something that you learn, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes a practice when your father works with you and lives with you in that life. It becomes a practice that you then adopt, right? It's one thing to know what God's laws are. It's another thing to practice God's laws.
Absolutely.
So we know that sex is not the determiner of you actually assuming your duties as a man. You have to learn that from your dad.
That's
and
right.
the historical way that this was done, I don't think a lot of people understand this. Men have always equally shared child rearing. I don't think a lot of people understand this. Really until the 1950s, when we got so rich, it changed. But before the 1950s, men always raised children equally. Here's how it worked. Women raised young children up to about the age of 9 in most cultures. In Western culture, most Western cultures, age of 9. At the age of 9, a young boy would leave his mother, and you see this in the Psalms. You leave your mother and you go with your father, right? And the father would raise boys. You would go with your father, and he would teach you how to be a man. The mother kept the girls and raised the girls after 9 years old. So women raised young children and girls, and fathers raised boys. And that's been the pattern for human history in all cultures, even pagan cultures, for all of human history. I mean, for example, one of the reasons that you have Jews and Italians that are made fun of for being mama's boys was because in their culture, they stayed with their mom until they were 12. So the 9-year-olds that were out working with their dad being macho would make fun of them. Say, yeah, you're still a girl, right? You're a girly man, still with your mom. Make fun of them, right? That's where all that comes from. So it's always been expected that men would raise children, especially boys.
Yeah.
And I think that there's been some mistakes in the modern world, even in churches, that raising children is women's work, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's not women's work.
Right.
Raising girls is women's work. Raising boys is men's work. And I took that very seriously. That's why I moved my business into my house, because I wanted my sons to actually witness me working.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear them, how I spoke and talked, the written products that I produced, the diligence with which I approached I wanted them to be there physically with me when I was working in order to instruct them.
Yeah.
So I have never bought into this idea that somehow fathers are superfluous to raising kids. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's been a change in the 20th century. There's a good book. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Expressive Self by a man named Truman, Mr. Truman. This book chronicles a change in our understanding of the human person that happened in the 20th century. So we have this Christian notion of a person that goes all the way back to Christ and what he taught the apostles. And don't forget, the pagans didn't have this understanding of the person. The notion of personhood doesn't come around in the world anywhere until you get Christ. So Christians, in order to understand the Trinity, had to understand deeply this notion of person, the three persons of the Trinity. And so the idea of an autonomous person that's worthy of infinite dignity, a soul worthy of infinite dignity, is a Christian thing. So in the 20th century, people came to believe that rather than being a soul worthy of infinite dignity, a person was a biological computer, programmed largely by evolutionary unconscious desires, and the human person exists to satisfy these desires. And so what we actually have in America, it's not really a left-right debate. It's not a pro-trans, anti-trans debate. What it is you have two groups of people who have totally different understandings of what a human person is.
Right.
There's a Christian understanding of a human person, and there's a pagan understanding of the human person. That's the real debate that's going on throughout our entire society. Mm-hmm. And from their perspective, it makes perfect sense to impose a sexual identity onto a child. Because to them, they've made sexuality... Well, think about it. If you have an evolutionary worldview, the sexual selection is the primary mechanism of the transmission of morality. As crazy as it is. So the sexual act becomes primary in an evolutionary worldview, right? Because sexual selection is all there is.
Yeah.
And so they make sexuality into an identity. And they look at a child and they say, well, this child has no sexuality. They haven't gone into puberty. So they have no human identity. And they feel sorry for the child and they impose an identity. And they use those terms. We're going to let the child explore their identity. You see, they're giving the child a fake identity so they can explore who they are. That's their idea. So I really think that until we come to grips in the churches and in politics, in our society, that when we say the term human person, the other side doesn't mean at all what we mean by that.
Wow.
I'll give you a story. I had an NBC producer that tried to, I think he was secretly recording me and doing a kind of God. He was trying to get an interview with my kids, which I never gave him. So we were at a restaurant. He finally got me alone. I tried not to be alone. He finally got me alone at a restaurant. It was Saturday, and he said, hey, you're a Christian, aren't you, Jeff? And I said, yeah. And he said, can I go to church with you tomorrow? And I said, sure, we're Orthodox, so, we stand up a lot, so wear comfortable shoes. I'll pick you up at 8 o'clock. We'll do Orthros, and then we'll do liturgy, and just be ready to stand a lot. And he said, but Jeff, I'm gay. And I said, well, hey, don't feel bad about it. Like, we all sin, The way we do it in Orthodoxy, the ecclesiastical day starts at sundown. So when the sun sets today at Saturday, just don't be gay until we get out of church around noon. Stop being gay. We call that fasting, just fast from being gay. I said, I'm going to be fasting from fornicating. I'm going to be fasting from eating. And I'm going to try my best to fast from hate. That's what I'm trying to do this Sunday and have a perfect sinless day. I said, all you got to do is you just got to walk up the aisle to the cross, bow to the cross, and try not to sin in those 14 steps to the cross and see if you can do it. I said, I've been trying to do it for about 20 years, and I've never successfully taken 14 steps without sinning. And he said, but Jeff, then I couldn't be who I really am. And I told him what I just told you. I said, well, okay, you think you're a biological computer programmed to satisfy unconscious desires, but I think you're a soul worthy of infinite dignity. Let's talk about why you think you're the way you are and why I think you're much more than that. Wow. And he started crying. So that's the true debate that's happening.
Yeah.
It's, for me and you and all the Christians in the world, your sexuality is a behavior. You can abstain from sex. You're perfectly in control of whether you have sex.
That's right.
Right? But for the other side, it's not like that. Their sexuality is an identity. And if they don't engage in the behavior in some serious way, they're denying themselves. They're denying who they really are. Wow. In a religious sense, in a deep spiritual sense. That's the problem we have in America today.
That's really great insight. I had never thought of it that way. And I'll hang on to that for sure.
The family court system is a system that was aligned with financial incentives. Remember we talked about financial incentives? Mm-hmm. In the late 80s and all through the 90s, huge, massive financial incentives were created for the states to remove fathers from homes in divorce. So Texas, for example, receives $500 million in Title IV-D reimbursements. Wow. And they only get those reimbursements if the father is removed from the children's lives. Okay, so it seems innocuous. It's reimbursements for the collection of child support. But the only way you get child support is if you don't have 50-50 parenting in divorce. Right. So somebody has to be removed in order for child support to be paid. That's why fathers, on average, after 4 years, most fathers in divorce lose all contact with their children.
Wow.
It becomes incredibly onerous and burdensome for fathers to do it, and they just can't do it. So the family courts have this massive financial, so that's the first thing. The second thing is there's something called the Domestic Relations Exception Rule. It's a rule promulgated for federal courts by the Supreme Court of the United States. It's not a precedent, it's not a law, it's just a rule that the Chief Justice of the court affirms. And when we get a new Chief Justice, they always reaffirm the rule. What it says is you can never bring a case from family court into federal court. It doesn't matter if there's civil rights violations. It doesn't matter if there's constitutional rights violations.
Yeah.
You cannot bring a case out of family court into federal court. So what that practically means is that the family court judges very well understand they have no oversight.
Yeah.
There's no appellate oversight of a family court. So the judges just do whatever they want. And in practice, here's what they do. They go, how would I raise this child? Well, I'm going to make the parents do it, but they're going to have to do the work and pay for it, but I'm going to make the parenting decisions. That's in practice how it works.
Wow.
So, there's all kinds of tricks they use. They trick parents into waiving their rights all the time. And one of the things that they really hated about me is I refused to waive my rights.
Yeah.
I was put under a gag order, which gave me a lifetime ban from doing any podcast interviews, writing newspaper articles, writing op-eds. I mean, it specifically mentions a lifetime ban from all. It's totally illegal. Wow. Right? And they do this all the time in family court. One of the reasons that you never see fathers talking out is that they're all under gag orders and they're terrified of going to jail for contempt for speaking out.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So you never hear from these fathers. You gotta have guys like me that just aren't going to shut up.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other tricks they do is they give you orders that you can't follow. So they knew that if the supervisors for my supervised visitation required me to use female pronouns and a fake girl's name, and they wouldn't let me change my son out of a dress, they refused to let me pray with my son. They knew that if they put those restrictions on it, I couldn't go to supervised visitation. And then when I didn't go to supervised visitation, they said, well, you abandon your sons.
That's right.
So we can let them move to California since you're not visiting them.
Wow.
Even today in California, where even in order for me to make a phone call to my sons, it has to be supervised and cost me $1,000.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. See how they create conditions where you can't satisfy the order.
Yeah.
So they're saying that, you know, they're saying none of my parental rights have been taken. From the court's perspective, my rights have not been taken because I can still make $1,000 phone call to my son. So this is how the courts work. And frankly, I am not seeing conservatives dealing with this issue. It's the biggest social issue in the country. Fatherlessness is the cause of almost all social pathologies in this country.
Agreed. Yeah, for sure.
And yet you will never hear a pastor talk about it, except in these terms. Why are these deadbeat dads not visiting their kids and doing all this stuff? Well, I've told you how courts create conditions that you can't do it.
Yeah.
Right? So, but nobody's saying, hey, maybe we need to change the laws.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we need to change family court.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing these things. Nobody will even talk about it. Conservatives especially. And there's one reason for that. Republican women and liberal women have one thing in common. They both believe that children belong to mothers and they don't belong to fathers. We've had an inversion in the Christian churches, for example, about this. Christianity is a paternalistic religion. Children are the primary responsibility and primarily are under the protection and patronage of the father, not the mother.
Yeah, that's right.
That's been reversed. That's been reversed in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Most churches have bought into this idea that children are first and foremost belong to the women. And the fathers are superfluous except for provisioning and protection. That's it. The idea of them actually being fathers and teaching boys to be men and actually having dominion over their families just is not taught in churches anymore. And so most Republicans, most pastors are terrified to talk about these issues because what they would have to do is alienate women in the churches. Many women just can't accept that fathers have equal rights to their children, at least equal rights. Under Christianity, more rights, but at least equal rights to their children. Most women, modern women, even Christian women, are simply unwilling to assent to that. And to avoid controversy, conservative men and pastors just don't talk about it. And consequently, getting legislative change is very, very difficult. We find that when we try to, for example, a lot of people don't know this, but interlocutory decisions, which are like orders that are passed before a final judgment. So say a judge says, well, until we get to trial, Mr. Younger, you get to see your kids 6 days a month, which is what they did. There's no way for me to appeal that. Family court interlocutory judgments are not appealable. They are in every other court in America, but not in family courts. We could pass a law and change that.
Yeah.
When we go to try to change laws like that, we encounter immense resistance from liberal women and Republican women. And so both sides of the legislature shut it down and we never get it. So, you know, one of the things that we're very uncomfortable talking about is how Christian women have imbibed a lot of secular feminism.
Yeah. I think that's
important. And make
important.
no mistake, the trans movement is driven by women. Make no mistake about this.
Wow.
It's when the pattern for young boys is mothers transition prepubescent boys and put them on puberty blockers. Females transition later after high school and in college, and it's female peer groups that push them into it. But in both cases, it's female-led. So make no mistake about this. The transgender movement is led by females.
Well, I think we all know as believers that Satan is attacking the family.
100%.
And by doing that, these little things, seemingly little things, are making huge changes. And I think, again, we go back to what we said in the first episode, that it is so important for believers to be engaged in what's happening in our government and politics, because if we just allow that to happen, here's where we end up.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of Christians understand the implications of the American system of government. In the American system of government, the people are the sovereign.
Yes, that's right.
Bible says that God appointed the sovereigns of the nations. That means God appointed the people to rule this country.
Yeah.
By not participating in politics, you're disobeying a direct commandment from God. You are appointed sovereign over this country, and it is your duty to preside over it.
Wow. So important.
Yes,
it really is important. And we have so many Christians, I think, that just feel like, I'm just going to focus on God and completely in the peripheral miss all of the important things that he's commanded us to do.
Correct.
So, Jeff, as we wrap up here, I want to first of all, I want to give you the opportunity to tell us, as people, again, on the sidelines, watching your case and many other situations with this whole transgender movement, how can we get involved? You've talked about the family courts and how we can work towards change there. Tell us, what can we do to get involved if there are people who are in this same situation or a similar situation? How do they work through this? And just as listeners in general who are going, this seems like a mountain, and I'm not able to do anything. Tell us how we can get involved and help in this situation.
So there are any number of groups you can contact. You can contact me on X, just at Jeff Younger Show. You can get model legislation, and you need to outlaw these procedures in your state if it's not already illegal.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that your county and school districts are also not allowing this stuff. So my sons were transitioned behind my back for a year by the schools. I would literally bring my son to school in boys' clothes. They'd give him a dress to wear.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's perfectly legal in all 50 states to do that, by the way. It needs to be made illegal. So you need to get model legislation and get your elected representatives to pass that legislation to protect children. Another problem we have is that there are now 11 states actually, that have passed transgender sanctuary bills. Meaning that if a child who is gender dysphoric enters into their state, they will never repatriate that child to a state that doesn't allow what they call gender affirming care. They won't send them back. Even on court order, they won't send them back.
Wow.
We need sanctuary bills in all the conservative states so that if a transgender child shows up in the state and is at threat of being chemically or physically castrated in their home state, we won't send them back. We do not support child abuse, and we will not send them back.
Yeah.
So getting politically active to get laws like this passed and to work with your local school districts to get these books out of the classroom and so forth, that's really where it's at. I mean, it's not glamorous. It's not a glamorous answer, is it?
Yeah.
One of the problems with the conservative movement is we've come to expect that getting involved means going to a convention with a charismatic speaker, having a nice dinner, and giving some money. That's what we think is getting things done. That's not how getting things done works. If you want to know why the left has killed us over the last 30 years, it's because they're sending their little old ladies to the school district meetings. They show up at the county. You know what the county commissioners' courts in your counties? Do you know they decide where all the federal money goes in your county? So do you want any of that money going to transgender stuff? Well, if you don't, then show up to county commissioner's court. Okay?
Wow.
So this is not glamorous. The work of governing a country as a sovereign, in a democratic system, it's not glamorous.
Yeah.
But it's simple as that. The other thing you can do is to confront people socially. You don't have to use pronouns. You don't have to call an ugly man in a dress a woman.
Yep.
You don't have to even allow them in public. In my view, the public square should be G-rated for children.
Amen.
There should be no sexuality. There should be no overt homosexuality. There should be no cross-dressing. And so there's nothing wrong with rebuking sinners who show up cross-dressing. There's nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't seed the public square on some weird notion of tolerance. That's very uncomfortable for a lot of conservatives because conservatives value social order.
Yeah.
And the left knows that, and they know that you're not going to make a scene. We'll start making scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, you cannot, under any circumstances, leave your children alone with licensed care providers.
Oh, my goodness.
Pediatricians are trained to ask the parents to leave the room for the exam.
Mm-hmm.
Don't. Why? Pediatricians will ask your kids about transgender issues. I know pediatricians that push it onto children secretly behind the parents' backs. Did you know that it's legal in all 50 states for a psychologist or a doctor to conduct secret therapy for your child without telling you?
Wow.
It's legal. It's perfectly legal. So you can never leave your children alone with licensed care professionals. And there's a corollary to that theorem. That means you cannot leave your children in public schools. If you want to know probably the biggest thing you could do that would have an effect 30 to 50 years down the line, it would be to remove your children from public schools. Public schools are the origin of the transgender epidemic. They're the origin of the ADHD epidemic. They're the reason why children graduate high school and leave the churches. Okay? So that's it. And the other thing is you can start respecting fathers and if you're a woman, don't allow women to disrespect fathers and men.
Amen.
Don't allow it.
Yeah.
Change the culture. If you're in control of the culture, change it. These are not glamorous answers, are they? They're not donate to this foundation. They're not, if you want to help me, you could always go to savejames.org. And if you have $5, it'll go to help my lawyers on appeal and things like that. But I'm not telling you to do that, am I? I'm telling you, you have to do the hard work of governing a country as a democratic people.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do.
It's hands-on.
It's hands-on.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that we can get behind things that we really believe in. Mm-hmm. Situations like this, where when I hear transgender, when I hear LGBTQ, I just kind of tune it out.
Yes.
Naturally.
That's what people do.
Because it doesn't pertain directly to me. But
right.
That's lulling ourselves to sleep and allowing the enemy to come in.
That's exactly how we got gay marriage, by the way. Because we did that.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Let me give you an example. I have when I was trying to get these bills passed in Texas, it took me 6 years and about $90,000 to get these bills finally passed. I had to fight the Republicans every step of the way.
Wow.
But we finally outlawed chemical castration and physical castration of kids in Texas. We would have these hearings at legislative sessions in the Senate and the House. The other side, the pro-trans people, I think the largest number they had was almost 70 pastors showed up to support them. Do you know I've never successfully gotten a single pastor to show up to support the bills protecting children from transgender surgeries? And they all tell me the same thing. They're afraid they'll lose their nonprofit status if they get involved in politics. My answer to these pastors was very simple. I just said, well, pay your damn taxes and preach the gospel.
That's right.
Then pay your taxes. Then you can say whatever you want. This is really about money with these churches.
It is.
And so you need to push your churches to get involved in these issues and just say, hey, maybe we're just going to have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that government has really taken over sections of our lives that it was never meant to take over. And when we allow that, then we give them permission to essentially speak on our behalf.
They're essentially, through the threat of taxation, they're essentially saying to churches what they can teach and what they cannot teach.
That's right. We went through that in 2020 with the COVID virus.
Correct.
And we had pastors that stood up and said, no, you're not going to tell me what we can and can't do, or keeping our doors closed or open.
Right.
And I think we need more pastors to stand up. Is it hard? Absolutely. I graduated from a Bible college with a pastoral degree, and I know from the sides of pastors, could I lose my job? Absolutely. I think we're at a point in America now where we have some momentum going in the right direction.
Yes.
I think now is a really opportune time to say, I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to get involved in these issues. Look, congregations look to their pastor. Most congregations look to their pastor as the guy with the answers.
Yes.
Scriptural and other. But if we're not able to give direction and stand on, scriptural precedents for things like what you're going through, it's just going to continue to get worse.
I mean, all you have to do is read the book of Acts.
Yeah, exactly.
And you see what happened to Paul. You know what happened to Peter.
Yeah.
You know what happened to the apostles. You know what happened to the 200 they sent out to the nations. You know what happened to these people. These people went to jail and worse.
Yeah.
So that to me is almost a marker of whether someone is actually preaching the gospel, because the gospel's not going to be received by the world in a friendly way.
That's right. That's right.
But a pastor that's afraid to suffer what Paul suffered, I got to wonder about that.
That's a bold statement, but I believe it's 100% true. We're all on the front lines. It's just a matter of how serious do we take this?
Yeah.
Are we gonna get up and we're gonna fight, or are we just gonna sit back and stay in our cushy, comfortable seats and pews?
There's a lot worse things than jail. I don't even get it. I told the court this multiple times when they threatened to throw me in jail for violating the gag order. I'm like, so what? I get 3 meals a day. I lose weight, get in shape. I'm going to be all ripped and cut up and looking good. Well, my wife's going to love me. I get to finish my book and work on mathematics all day. What are you telling me? What's so bad about this?
Yeah.
There's a lot worse things than prison.
Yeah.
But our guys are just terrified of these things. They're terrified of even an IRS audit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's time for us to stand up. I think we've lived in such a great country for so long that we've been spoon-fed, and we're afraid of losing our comforts. And my goodness, we need to stand up as a church.
When the churches were founded, the early churches, there was no comfort.
No, not at all.
There's no comfort. We don't see comfort really until the 20th century among churchmen had it really difficult.
Yeah, that's right.
They made sacrifices. And we looked up to them because they were willing to make those sacrifices.
Absolutely.
That's what gave them the authority to teach us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. It's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, man.
And we need to do that. Jeff, I would love to have you back. There's so much more that I want to discuss. My goodness, I want to talk about the pharmaceutical industry and so much more that really is shaping this culture of what you're dealing with. So, love to have you back.
Let's do it.
Listen, I know this is a controversial topic. If you're offended by this, I would ask that you would please just seek out the truth, because there is a lot of stuff that is not true that is being shoved down our throats as truth. And, this is, again, we don't talk a lot about politics on this podcast, but I changed the name a while back so that we actually could, because I want our Christian community to know that we have a command from the Lord to make sure that Scripture, that we're standing on Scripture and how it affects our society. So I would love to hear from you. We'll put all of the information that Jeff gave us in the show notes and the description on YouTube. Jeff, we look forward to having you back sometime, and we're going to be praying for you. And thank you for taking a stand and not bowing down, because we need more people like you, and so appreciate that.
I was really glad to be here. It was a wonderful interview. Thank you.